for the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Israeli government continues to detain most of the passengers seized in international waters Friday while trying to challenge the Israeli blockade on Gaza. The passengers were on two boats, one from Canada, the other from Ireland, as part of the Freedom Waves Flotilla to Gaza. Around 20 activists are believed to remain in custody after refusing to sign statements asserting they'd entered Israel illegally. Flotilla organizers have accused the Israeli military of abusing the activists with allegations of physical assault and the use of tasers. Democracy Now! Correspondent Jihan Hafetz was among those detained in the Israeli raid. She had been filing daily reports for Democracy Now! From the Canadian ship called the Tahrir. She spent 3 nights behind bars. She was finally deported Monday night, landed in New York just hours ago. In this Democracy Now! Exclusive, Jihan joins me now in our New York studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much, Amy.
It's very good to have you back. It was a battle to get you released this weekend from Israeli detention. Can you describe first what happened on Friday? Yesterday we interviewed the Egyptian reporter about what she saw. She was also on the boat. But today, Jihan, tell us what happened.
Well, they contacted us about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and we knew that that they had arrived because all the communication had shut down on our boat. The satellite phones didn't work as well. There was no internet. The satellite beacon I'd had to communicate with you and also to check email or to do any kind of updates was no longer working. And so we figured at that point that they were around. And then, of course, they made contact with us, and the Israeli Navy asked us what the course of our where our course was headed. And David Heap, the member of the steering committee, said
he is one of the Canadian activists.
Exactly, he's one of the Canadian activists still in detention in Israel, waiting to be deported. They haven't mentioned anything about his case yet, but he, along with Ehab, who's also a member of the steering committee on the Canadian boat, said that we're sailing toward the goodness of humanity, and it seemed that irritated them a number of times because they wanted a location as to where we were sailing off to, but they continued with, we're sailing to end the occupation, we're sailing for a better future. And then from there on out, they attempted to discuss some kind of negotiation where Israeli commandos would come on board, search the boat for weapons, and then allow us to go on our journey to Gaza, which everyone on the boat, including the journalists, knew would not happen. We saw that as a pretext for them to come on, detain everyone, and forcefully take us to Ashdod, the Israeli port next to Gaza. And of course, this is also something the Irish delegation, which was 15 people on all Irish, by the way, on the Saoirse, which
some was parliamentarians,
parliamentarians, yes, including a European MEP. He was also on the boat, and
that's a member of the European Parliament.
Exactly, and a former member of the Irish rugby team, a national team there. And they also refused to consent to the Israeli Israeli Navy boarding the ship and taking it to Ashdod. Everyone agreed that there would be passive resistance, that if they were to come on, we would not resist them in any way, but we would take what they said if they were to detain us, which they did. And in the end, that happened. It did take an hour for them to come to some kind of negotiation. No negotiation was reached, and they were very irritated at that point. They were circling the boat multiple times.
And how many ships were there?
There were 3 warships, and there are about 20 smaller gunboats, so 4 Zodiac boats. And these are boats that can maneuver very quickly and can disrupt. Our boats were not as big as the warships, but they could disrupt us in the water, and they pushed us forcefully side to side because the waters that day were rough as a storm was coming. And so they were intimidating both boats, going back and forth, surrounding them. There were 4 Zodiacs, 4 water cannon boats, as well as 4 regular gunboats. All of the commandos on all of these boats were heavily armed. I mean, obviously, they did not look like they were taking 2 very much smaller boats filled with unarmed people, with activists and civilians that looked like they were taking on an army of a foreign country. In any case, they They followed the Irish boat, which decided to make a run for it. They went straight ahead, attempted to break away from the Israeli commandos, and at that point, two water cannons started to pour lots of water into the Irish boat, which flooded it, blew their sockets, and cut off all the electricity. And so at that point, the Irish delegates I spoke to said, they told the Israeli army, we're taking on water, we're sinking, we're going to go down and see if you continue with the water. Our boat, on the other hand, they started to board our boat as soon as the Irish boat went down, and they boarded that one. And as soon as they came on board, they were extremely hostile. They approached us as if we were armed. They had guns in everyone's faces and everyone pointed at everyone's heads. And I found it interesting and somewhat schizophrenic that they would say, with their guns pointed in our faces, don't worry, sit down, get up, don't worry, move to the side, don't worry, it'll be okay. And it's hard to believe a soldier. You don't have his face because all their faces are masked, black masks. It's hard to believe someone that has their gun in your face that not to worry, everything will be okay. At this point, they attempt to separate us. They put the men on one side and the women on the other side. As they're boarding, they taser David Heap, who was in the captain's room, trying to get to the back of the boat.
Canadian activists.
He was one of the Canadian activists, and he was tasered on the arm.
You saw this?
I did, yes, in the captain's quarters. He was there with George, who was our captain. He's a Greek activist, and they tried to force them out to the side, to the back of the boat where we were. They weren't resisting. They were moving slowly, but not resisting, and I guess it wasn't fast enough for them.
Were you filming any of this?
Unfortunately, at this point, I did stop filming because I wanted to hide my chips. I knew that if I had any chance to take any of this video out, I'd have to hide the video. I'd have to hide the chips that I had from the experience of the Marvin Marmara. Casey Kaufman of Al Jazeera was filming up until the commandos stepped on the boat. And as soon as they stepped on the boat, they grabbed his camera and grabbed all the other cameras on board and put them to the side. And so most of the filming stopped as soon as they boarded the boat. And they were very forceful with Michael Coleman, who was a delegate, the only Australian delegate. He did resist. He was not cooperating with any of their demands. They dragged him to the other side of the boat. They had guns to his back as well as to his head as they frisked him. And they even had lasers pointed at his chest. And this irritated a lot of people on board, including the journalists, because it seemed as though they were threatening to shoot him. And so we were a bit concerned about having lasers pointed at people, at which point they put it down. But they detained us and kept us all on the top of the boat until there were requests made to go down because it was very cold heading back toward Ashdod.
So you're taken to Ashdod. There, what else did you see? What happened to the activists there?
Well, we knew that upon arriving, because when they did board our boat, and the first time I see the video of what happened is, of course, the Israeli video, because we don't have any of our images. So we don't
have them because
they took them from us, and they would not let me come back to the United States with them. And I found it interesting that when they boarded the boat, they had some Israeli commandos with cameras strapped to their helmets. And so they were walking around filming us. We asked them for water because there were some people who were dehydrated and who desperately needed water before we arrived at the port. And at that point, we didn't know if we could have water at the port as well. So they allowed us to drink water, and whenever anyone attempted to drink, they had the cameras in people's faces, and the activists were saying this is going to be part of their propaganda machine to show that they were very cordial toward the activists and to the reporters they had detained. And as soon as we got to the port in Ashdod, as soon as we got there, they already had an army of people ready to greet us. They had people, multiple soldiers with television cameras. It seemed as though they had a medical facility there. They had 3 huge vans with, it seemed like surveillance machines where they'd put our things through. We were escorted off the boat. And of course, before we got off the boat, everyone warned, if they attempt to help you, just don't carry your own things out and help yourself off the boat because they have cameras facing our way. And it was perceived that they would use this video as propaganda. So of course, as everyone's getting off the boat, they have cameras in everyone's faces, cameras out their things. They even taped our passports which I found to be shocking because these are travel documents, and they moved us, they brought us to this warehouse.
Did they hurt any of the activists getting onto the bus?
Yes, they did. After going through strip searches with myself and some of the female activists.
You were strip searched?
Yes, I was strip searched because I tried to hide these chips I mentioned, and I hid them in my underwear because I didn't think, I knew they were going to find them, but I attempted to see if it would work or not. And so they did a thorough search without my clothes on initially, and then they used a metal detector, and they detected the metal in these chips. And at that point, they asked me to remove all my clothing, and they did a very thorough strip search of my body to see if there's anything else on it. And this also happened to two of the Irish women who were also on the boat. They found chips in their bras. So anything they found that they suspected was, I'm not sure what it was, but they would immediately strip search you and take you to board the bus. And when they boarded me on the bus, I did witness extreme violence toward Michael Coleman, who I must say was the most defiant of that day that we were taken.
He was the Australian activist.
Yes, of course, he was the Australian activist, and while I was sitting down, I could hear him arguing with them. You kidnapped us, you're pirates, you violate international law, you're lawless. And I think the more he would say these things that would irritate them, the more violent they would become.
What happened with the flags on the boats?
Oh, this was interesting with the flags. The activists didn't put up the Palestinian flag until Friday, when everyone presumed that the boat would be taken by the Israelis.
Before that, it was Canadian flagged and Irish flagged.
Yes, Canadian and Irish flags on both the boats. And then, of course, we put up Palestinian flags as we attempted to head into Gaza.
The activists put up the flags.
Yes, the activists put up those flags on the Canadian boat and on the Sear show, which was, we very celebrated because we were about 45 nautical miles from Gaza, and it seemed almost, there's almost jubilation that this is possible, it could go through. And of course, as the Israeli Navy boarded the boat, immediately after putting us in our corners and searching us, they tore down the Palestinian flags, and they put up the Israeli flags. It seemed to me as almost a sign of conquer and heading into their port. When they attempted to do this with the Irish boat, however, the Irish refused to have that happen. They shielded their poles and said, you will not remove any flags from our ship. You will take it into the port with the flags on it. And for whatever reason, the Israeli soldiers on their boat listened to them, and they rolled into Ashdod without any problems, with the Palestinian and the Irish flag on their boats.
So one boat came in with the Israeli flags,
yes,
and the Irish boat came in with the Palestinian flags.
Yes.
So then you're brought into detention. We're making calls nonstop at this point for you as a journalist accredited. Well, you have two press IDs.
Yes, I do. I have one from Democracy Now! I'm also credentialed by the U.S. TV Senate Radio Gallery. It's a U.S. government-issued ID. So I don't just have...
Because you covered the Senate and the House in
Because
Washington.
Exactly. When I worked in Washington, I covered that's usually if you work in Washington, that's the government-issued ID that gets you into the State Department, the White House, the Pentagon. So it's an authentic, it's a U.S. government-issued ID.
And you're a U.S. citizen.
And I am a U.S. citizen. And they took us into this area to process us, which we later found out was court. It wasn't court. It was someone sitting across a desk telling you have to sign a document that you illegally came into Ashdod and that you violated an international siege on Gaza. And everyone refused this because we were kidnapped in international waters and forced into Ashdod. It was never our destination to begin with. And I told him that I'm not an activist. I'm here as a journalist covering for Democracy Now! I mentioned both my credentials. And he said to me that the Israeli government does not see my reporting or Democracy Now's as reporting. It's as journalism. It's to them activism. And so they did not designate me.
Journalism is activism.
That's what they said. They said that this form of journalism is actually activism. And so they designated me from there on out as an activist, not as a journalist. And even when I told them multiple times, please let me go through my bag, let me get you my press credentials, let me get you the one from the U.S. government, I'll show you that I'm here on assignment, I'm not here as a member of the delegation, they refused. And it almost seemed as though they had this, they already had it drilled into their system that I would continue on from there on out as an activist. Because everyone I spoke to would continue to say, so why were you part of the American delegation? I said, no, I was here on assignment. And I was shocked that they allowed Casey Kaufman of Al Jazeera. They had him down as a journalist, as well as Hassan Ghani of Press TV. But when it came to me, I was lumped into the rest of the activism.
And what has happened to Hassan Ghani?
I haven't heard from Hassan
How was he
since that
referred
night.
to there?
He was referred to as the Iranian. Press TV is an Iranian station, and Hassan actually is not Iranian whatsoever. He's a Pakistani descent, but he's actually a British national. He was born in the UK, and he has a British passport. But they continuously kept referring to him as the Iranian, as the Iranian. So I was worried at that point as to what would happen to him afterward if they kept designating him as an Iranian.
This is Israeli Army spokesperson Ali Shalikar defending Israel's decision to intercept the flotilla boats in international waters.
A short while ago, the Israeli Navy boarded the two vessels which were on their way to break the maritime security blockade which was imposed by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We are talking about a very clear case of provocation, and we maintain our right to defend our borders.
There is the Israeli Army spokesperson saying we remain our right to defend our borders. Jahan Hafetz, your response?
Well, that was the response all along, and we knew that before we, as soon as it was announced, the media embargo, the information embargo was lifted, the Israelis responded right away, and that response seemed to match what they said. We were well aware that they were, if they were to intercept the boats, and we knew that they were to intercept the boats, that this would be the response coming out, that we were violating their embargo, and that, and what we're also hearing is that the 100-kilometer, they had jurisdiction over international waters, and they made that very clear to us as well. They, I mean, if I could just quote what one of the guards said to us, she said, "You are not an Israeli, you are in Israel now, and we make the law." And it was very much that's how it was the whole way through. Whenever we tried to, even the journalists who said, listen, we were in international waters, you kidnapped us, you brought us here, we were forced here, we won't sign things that say that we came here illegally, because we didn't. They would keep saying to us, well, this is international law, and you violated a so-called international embargo against Gaza. They didn't say the Israeli embargo, they said the international embargo to give it more authority over what they were doing.
You are a U.S. citizen. The United States government is responsible for what happens to you.
Yes.
What was the U.S. response as you were in jail for the 3 days you were there?
I was very shocked by the U.S. response, by their involvement in our case. Kit Kittredge and I were both Americans.
Kit Kittredge was the American activist.
Yes, he was actually the only American activist on the trip, and we were shocked that it took a while for them to come to our aid, and well, the Irish delegations and the Australian and Canadian delegations had their representatives, and the Irish ambassador come 3 days of the 3 days we were detained. The Americans came twice, and they came at the very end of the day with barely any kind of helpful information other than what the Israelis were telling us to do, which was sign away that you entered illegally. And I found it somewhat astonishing that the U.S. representative from the U.S. Embassy said to us, he admitted that they are powerless in Israel. They're powerless over our cases, that they're in a foreign country, and that they can't do anything, and that they're being given the runaround. And I was wondering why they came the second day so late. Kit and I said to them, where the hell have you guys been? We've been rotting away in this detention facility, no information. We keep watching the Irish and the Canadians go out speaking to their people, coming back with substantial information that pertains to their release. And meanwhile, we're rotting away wondering what happened to our governments and wondering why they can't get us out, given the close connection, the close relationship financially, militarily between Israel and the United States.
And what was the response?
And the response was they're giving us the runaround and that they're powerless in a foreign country. I mean, they literally said, we are powerless in a foreign country. And we couldn't believe that they were saying this to us, because this is the U.S. Embassy. Everyone on the delegation too thought that the U.S. would come to our aid very quickly. They would find some way to get us out as U.S. citizens. But I have to say, we were not, the other delegations were much better off than Kit and I were
So the Irish
under the
ambassador
U.S. The Irish ambassador came every day, and he refused to leave.
Did the U.S. ambassador come
Of
to
course
visit you?
not. No, and we asked him to come, and we asked him to make sure that the Israeli prison guards were giving us free association in the open courtyard. We did not see ourselves as criminals or as immigrants that need to be deported. We were there as political prisoners at this point. And we wanted to make it very clear to those Israeli prison guards that we should have writing materials and other things that the other delegations were having. But they seemed almost, oh no, this might seem a little bit too much to ask them. We're just trying to get you to be released. What seemed they wanted the most was for us to sign this paper.
That said you had illegally
That said we had
Israel.
entered illegally, yes.
So ultimately, what did you sign?
So ultimately, I signed a deportation, a letter of my deportation out of Israel.
That did not say that you had illegally
That does not say
entered.
anywhere that I entered illegally. It just consents to after 72 hours I am being deported.
Where was your equipment? Both your tapes as well as your camera. What did they tell you about getting them back, as they were assuring us that you would be able to get them back at the airport?
Yes. Multiple times I told them, and I saw $20,000 worth of my equipment. When I came in the first night into this warehouse where they did the strip search, I saw my equipment on a table, and I said, I need a receipt for all of that belongs to me. And they kept saying, oh, no, at the airport when you leave, you'll get it. At the airport when you leave, you'll get it. And of course, when I met with the representatives from the U.S. Embassy, the Israeli prison guards, as well as the commander in charge of the jail, said to us, oh, she will get her equipment at the airport as soon as she leaves. When I left last night, not only did I leave without knowing any information, literally as a political prisoner, as a criminal, they would not let me have any kind of communication with other people who were leaving the country. They snuck me in through the separate staircase that led to the front of the plane. And when I asked them multiple times, where's my equipment? Oh, sorry, you have to get the U.S. Embassy to get your equipment for you. And it was extremely confusing because I saw the commander who had taken my things on Friday. And I said, listen, you said...
At the airport?
At the airport, yes. And he refused to speak to me. He refused to give me his name, at least details about who I can call the Israeli government about my equipment. And they were being extremely evasive the whole time through. I actually didn't know my flight number till I arrived in New York this morning. And I didn't even know I was coming to Newark today until I was halfway, the voyage was halfway across the Mediterranean on the plane. So, I mean, they completely kept us in the black, treated us as criminals the whole time. And that was my experience there. If I can just mention my most humiliating experience while I was in their custody, and speaking to the other female guards, who are now really my sisters after what we experienced. As soon as we arrived...
The female guards.
Not the female guards, the female prisoners, I'm sorry, the women from the Irish delegation, as well as the Canadian and American. As soon as we arrived at this jail, there were about 40 prison guards outside. Four of the 40 had video cameras zoomed into our faces the whole time. They brought our bags in. They kept filming us. They did another search, another strip search actually, filming our ID.
They filmed you naked?
Yes, they did. They filmed my back, not my bottom area, but my back area naked. And then they brought us into this area where they were doing processing. And there were about 10 guards each on my bags, going through my things, sniffing my underwear, putting different metal detectors inside, just going over and over the same motions in a very robotic way, as if there was no kind of humanity in the room, that they couldn't tell me, oh, we're going to go through your bags now, watch it. They were just doing it in a very mechanical way.
And when you were put on the plane, the continental flight home?
Yes, when I was put on the continental flight home, I was given no information. The guard that put me on, I'm not sure what he told the stewardess who put me on this plane, but I did ask her multiple times for a newspaper. I don't know what's going on in the world at all until today. And I asked her a couple of times, can I have a newspaper, can I have a newspaper? And then very last minute she said, no, you don't get newspapers. And she just walked away and didn't say anything. And if I didn't make a scene there, it would be somewhat embarrassing or somewhat chaotic because of all the other passengers. And so I just took it that way. But the whole time through...
Were you able to make a call when you were in detention for the days that you were?
Yes. I was, 48 hours later, I was able to make a phone call. In fact, one of the rights they claim to have read us says you have the right to notify a close friend, relative, an attorney, or an official of your country upon being detained. I was able to make a phone call 48 hours later So no one knew what was happening with me. No one had heard my voice or knew if I was okay or not until 48 hours later when I called my sister, and they recorded the conversation, and they only allowed 3 minutes.
And the call could go to where?
And the call could only go to your home country. So you could only call your home country, and you could only call a relative. And they said to me, do not say anything negative. Say good things that have happened to you. Say how we've been treating you. Do not say anything negative. They said this to the other women as well. They said to the other women, do not say negative things on the phone. Do not say political things on the phone.
At this point, the majority of people who were detained are still in detention. In these last 30 seconds, can you talk about what you know of the people now?
They're supposed to be released today. The 72 hours of their detention was up last night. And so what I think the Irish delegation is refusing is to buy their own tickets. They believe that the Israeli Ministry of Interior should purchase their tickets for kidnapping them and bringing them to Ashdod. I do believe Kit Kittredge, the only American delegate on the ship, the Canadian ship, is being deported here to New York, should be here very shortly, and that the Canadians, along with Michael Coleman, the Australian, and the Irish, have formed a committee inside their cell block, and they're demanding that the Israeli prison guards allow free association, free reading materials, and phone calls, which is something we did not have as 5 women in our holding cells. We weren't able to have that kind of momentum as the men do as 15 individuals, as more individuals than 15, actually.
Will you be able to get your equipment back?
I hope so, but the American official at the U.S. Embassy said it's taken them 1.5 years to get broken equipment back from the Marmara trip for other journalists. So I hope they live up to their word and they don't steal or break my equipment, but unfortunately, I prefer to have left Israel with my things. I'm not sure how long it will take to get them back.
And it's your footage as well of the entire trip.
My footage of the entire trip, my hard drives, everything. I mean, everything was taken from me. $20,000 worth of equipment.
Jehan Hafetz, I want to thank you for being with us. Democracy Now! Correspondent has just returned to the United States after being detained and deported by the Israeli authorities for covering the Freedom Waves Flotilla to Gaza. They were taken in international waters, brought into Israel, where they were held. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. To see her reports in international waters, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. We'll be back in a minute.